Okay, so are you ready to dive in? Because today we're tackling a big one. How many Native American cultures view death and dying?
And you really weren't kidding when you said we had a lot to work with this time.
Yeah, I mean, wow, you've given us academic papers, firsthand descriptions of ceremonies, and even poetry. Actually, you know what? It was that poem, the one about returning from the afterlife with gifts, that really got me thinking.
It is a remarkable look at how these cultures view the afterlife, isn't it? And that's really the key here to start with. Understanding that for many Native Americans, death isn't an ending.
Right.
It's a transition, part of a much larger journey that's connected to the spirit world.
I'm always trying to figure out the why behind things.
Sure.
So, how does this concept of death as a transition actually play out in their lives? I mean, what does it mean for how people live and how they think about those who've passed on?
Well, one of the biggest differences you see is this idea of kinship beyond the grave. It goes way beyond just remembering loved ones. It's about a real relationship with their spirits. Think about it, a world where your ancestors are still present, still there to offer guidance and support. That's the kind of connection we're talking about.
So it completely reshapes your whole perspective. It's
Mhm.
not just about dealing with grief and loss, but this sense that the bond continues.
Yeah.
Is that where this idea I read about comes in, the Winnebago funeral, where they directly address the deceased?
Exactly. In some cultures, you might hear the speaker at a funeral say something like, "We know you're here with us, standing close by." And it's not meant to be morbid or anything.
Yeah.
It's acknowledging that the spirit is still present.
Wow, that's such a powerful image to think about someone speaking to their loved one like they're right there in the room. Is that connected to why, in some cultures, people don't say the deceased person's name for a while? I have to admit, that one surprised me.
It seems unusual at first, right? But it comes from that same deep respect for the spirit and the journey it's on. The belief is that speaking their name could actually disrupt their transition to the afterlife.
Oh, I see. So it's a way of protecting the spirit as it travels to the next world.
Yeah.
It's not about holding on to the past, but making sure their loved one's transition is as smooth as possible. And this is where those rituals come in, right?
Yes.
The smudging, the pipe ceremonies, all of that.
Those rituals are how these beliefs are expressed and experienced, that they give people a way to work through the emotional and spiritual parts of death and dying.
So let's start with smudging. I know a lot of our listeners might be familiar with that one already.
Right.
But what does it mean in this context?
You're right. Smudging is used in a lot of spiritual traditions, but in many Native American cultures, it's about so much more than just a nice smell,
Yeah.
burning sage or cedar. It's believed that the smoke actually carries prayers up to the heavens. It purifies spaces, people, cleansing them of any negative energy.
So it's about creating a sacred space,
Yes.
a space for grieving and remembering, for connecting with the spirits of those who have passed.
Exactly. It's about preparing yourself to have a deep spiritual experience. And speaking of deep spiritual experiences, we have to talk about the sacred pipe ceremony.
Yeah.
It's something you have to understand to truly appreciate.
So paint me a picture. What would I see if I was lucky enough to witness a sacred pipe ceremony?
Well, you'd probably be sitting in a circle with everyone else, a fire going in the middle, and there'd be an elder, someone everyone really respects for their spiritual knowledge, getting the pipe ready.
Okay.
And the pipe itself is sacred, It symbolizes how everything's connected.
I can already feel that sense of reverence just thinking about it.
Right. As the pipe is filled with tobacco, and it's important to understand, tobacco here isn't just any plant. It's a sacred offering to the Great Spirit.
It's not like just lighting up how some people might picture it.
Not at all. This ceremony, it's about connecting with something bigger than yourself. So the elder lights the pipe, and they offer the smoke to the four directions, north, east, south, west,
Right. Yeah.
acknowledging the spirits and how everything's connected.
And they offer it to the sky and the earth too, right?
You're on top of it, offering the smoke up to the Great Spirit, down to Mother Earth, the giver of life.
It's all connected.
It all comes back to that kinship we were talking about.
So I'm guessing the pipe doesn't just stay with the elder.
You know it. They pass it around the circle, and each person takes a turn. They breathe in the sacred smoke, connecting with the Great Spirit and everyone else there, both the living and those who've passed on.
Wow. When you put it that way, it's hard not to be moved by how much meaning is packed into this one ceremony. But we've also got these poems, these incredible expressions of grief and remembrance. How do those fit in?
The songs and poems that they give us a really personal look at the pain of loss, but also at how resilient the human spirit can be. Like, remember that line from the poem we talked about earlier? Come back to us, our lost ones. We have presents for you.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, but there's also this warmth to it.
Exactly. This deep longing to stay connected, to keep those bonds alive even after death. And then there are lines that capture that pain of being apart so powerfully, like, my brother, come back to me. My brother, come back, and we will give you a small present. It's something everyone understands, that feeling of grief, but expressed in the way of that specific tribe.
But it's never all sadness, is it? There's always this element of hope, of acceptance, especially in the poetry you picked out.
That's what makes these traditions so beautiful. Like these lines, listen to this. Though I go from you to die, we shall both lie down at the foot of the hill and sleep. Death isn't the end, it's a reunion, a return to a spiritual home.
It really puts things in perspective, how much our own fears about death are tied to how we were raised and the culture we live in.
I agree. And while we're on the subject of these Native American perspectives, we have to remember there are so many different tribal nations.
Of
We
course.
can't just lump them all together. It's about understanding the unique beauty and complexity of each culture.
It's easy to make generalizations, but each tribe has its own ways of honoring death, its own beliefs and practices.
Exactly. We need to approach all of this with humility and a real desire to learn.
So as we get to the end of our deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope sticks with our listener today?
If they only remember one thing, I hope it's that death doesn't have to be all about sadness and fear. It can be about reverence and respect, about a deep connection to the spiritual world.
It's definitely something to think about. It makes you think, what if we looked at death that way, like it was a journey home and not just the end?
It's pretty amazing when you really consider it. And that's what's so important about learning about these traditions, not to take them for ourselves, but to let them open our minds about death and dying.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, all these different cultures and their perspectives on death, is there anything else like a final question, something you want to leave our listener with today?
Well, you've given everyone so much to think about already. All these incredible sources, such a clear look at these beliefs. What about you? What if you took some time to see how all of this, the rituals, the ways they express grief and hope, how that might change how you feel about death?
Wow, yeah. It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
Hmm.
How we can find peace and connection even when we experience loss. And on that note, we're going to have to wrap up this incredible deep dive. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And as always, keep those amazing source materials coming.